Hi everyone, Russell here again. Today I installed the turbo kit. It is finished, but I will show you step by step how I did that. Everything went together pretty well on it. The only issue I had was after I got everything back together, reflashed it, went out for a drive. It was sputtering, it wasn't running right, it was acting like it was running out of gas. I brought it back into the garage, looked everything over, everything looked good to me, and then I just decided to reflash it again, and that worked. I went for another 20 miles, and boy, this thing flies. So once I added those 32-inch tires, I felt like I lost about 25 horsepower. With this turbo kit on it, it absolutely screams. I can't wait to put my 28s back on and go on the racetrack with this. So my advice to you is if you don't want to spend $5,800, do not drive one with the turbo. Because once you have that turbo, you can't go back. All right, so here's the Jackson Racing programmer. And keep in mind that once you flash your Talon with this, it is locked to your Talon. So pretty much I can't, go to somebody else's Talon and use it on theirs. So when you get to the main screen, this is a touch screen. You'll just touch the top left side. So you can do this while you're driving around. There's a bunch of different screens. This particular screen is your boost. And when you get a full throttle, it does go up to 8 pounds of boost. So keep in mind that we're at approximately 170 horsepower, and once somebody comes out with a tune for this, and you increase the boost, you can usually get over 200 horsepower in the Talon with this setup. Another cool feature, you can click on airs, and it'll tell you if there's any codes, which I don't have any, and you can hit clear if you do. Now this goes back to the screen. You just kind of touch it. That's the settings. You can change your from standard to metric. A few other things, but really this is where you go in here. And right here is flash. Of course I have the A. And then right here is where you select your tire size. So each time you swap your tires, you can go in here and reflash it to those specific tire sizes. So let's just say we'll do 32. Are you sure you want to flash this tune? So pretty much as simple as that. It takes 2, maximum 3 minutes to reflash your ECU. It just plugs in underneath the seat to that red connector I showed you, but pretty happy with it so far. I guess the one part of this that I'm disappointed about is I'm gonna have to wait a while before I can reattach my particle separator. So that particle separator makes a huge difference. I mean, the Talon's a great machine, but the one flaw was that air box right there. 200 to 400 miles in dusty conditions, your air filter was plugged up. You're looking at $40, $45, $50 for a new air filter. With that particle separator, I'm confident you can get at least 2,000 miles or more out of one air filter. It does really work great. And then where I had it mounted, I could go through at least 6 feet of water. So that's the only downfall. But Jackson Racing is saying that they're going to come out with a kit to where I can use that particle separator sometime in the near future. Another thing with this tune is how it remaps your transmission for your tire size. I've went out numerous times with these 32s on the factory setup, and I was getting some weird shifting. It just wasn't working right. I had to put it in the manual mode when I was off-roading, pushing through snow. But I will say with this flash, and you can program your tire size, it seems to be working perfectly, you know, and then you can just reflash it to a different size. So. All right, to get this install job started, we're gonna disconnect the negative on the battery. Then we're going to remove the center console there, the fuse box cover that sits right there between the seats. Take the two lower seats out. Remove the passenger side. There's two 12mm bolts, two 12mm nuts to get the passenger seat completely out. Driver side, there's 8 12mm bolts, 4 holding the frame and 4 holding the sliding section of it. Then we're gonna go to the center console, which has the little push rivets, the different type of push rivets where you basically just push it in about 1/4 of an inch and then you pull the rivet out. And then this is the piece that goes over the center console right there. You have a bunch of push rivets. On the driver's side, you have 2 bolts you have to remove, one on the inside, which is right there, one on the outside, so right by the rear driver's side tire, 2 bolts, and then a bunch of push rivets. You can pull that completely out. And then you probably can't tell what this piece is, but this is on the passenger side, covering the snorkel. So that's right behind the passenger seat cover. I'll show you in a second where that's at. So then once you get all the things out that I just showed you, right down here, if you watched my valve adjustment video, there's and I'll get a little closer a little later, but there's a 24mm nut there that we have to take off a cover to the crankshaft. So let's go around. So that piece I was just telling you about is right here. I think there was like 11 push rivets, and 2 of them are actually right here on the outside. And then, so I have the particle separator in there. If you don't have the particle separator, you'll still have the snorkel. So either way, you'll loosen up this hose clamp right there that goes into your air box. All right, next we're gonna take out the air box, okay? So you have a 10mm bolt here. You have the sensor that you can pull out or unplug it. Probably best to unplug it and then pull the sensor out once you get the air box out. There's gonna be a hose right here to pull off. Okay, there's gonna be a hose down here you have to pull off. It has a little clamp on it. You can, on both of these, you can just squeeze the clamp with your fingers and pull the hose off. Here, you know, loosen up both of these clamps, and I just kind of gently pried and pulled them up before I tried removing the air box. Okay, and this is down on the bottom side. That's gonna hook up to your existing header. Another 10mm bolt. And then you'll take that off. And of course the snorkel or your particle separator, you'll loosen up the clamp there. Okay, and while I have this out, I was getting 300 miles out of an air filter before the particle separator, and I looked at the filters. It looks like brand new after almost 1,000 miles. So you can probably get several thousand miles out of an air filter with the particle separator in dusty conditions. So this is what it looks like when you get everything out. Here's the hose on the top. Like I said, I just squeezed that with my fingers, pulled that off. Here's the one on the bottom. Also squeezed my fingers, pulled that off. Got a clean towel in here plugging up and covering the throttle body so that we don't get any dust in there. Here's the sensor. So you can unhook it here and then pull it out once you get the air box out. So this is what it looks like once you get everything taken out. And the one bolt on the bottom is right here, hooked up to the heat shield. So pretty easy to get that out, a couple minutes. All right, so then we're gonna remove the heat shield. This is the bolt that the bottom of the air box was hooked to, and then back up underneath is two 10mm bolts you have to take out, and then that heat shield completely comes out. The next step is remove those two 12mm bolts that hold the header to the exhaust. Take those out. I lubed up the rubber there a little bit so it pops out super easy. And then the four 12mm bolts holding the exhaust header in. So it only took a few minutes to get all of that out, super easy. Here on the top of the engine, we're going to undo both injector clips. So one right there, one right here. Just going to, of course, you know, push and pull. Push that down, pull up. And then there's four 8mm bolts we're going to remove. So two there and two there on the back side. All right, so here's the old injector and new injector. Side by side there. I have this one installed. So to get those out, you just kind of slowly, gently slide those straight up. Pull them straight up once you have the four bolts out. And then you'll slowly and gently separate the injector from the rail. Okay, pretty easy process. Okay, I'm gonna put the other injector on and put it back into place. Also, make sure that you have this, it doesn't look like I have it clean, but before I removed anything, I really hit it with air to get rid of some dust. I washed it a while ago, but it is 13 degrees today, so. But the injector swap is pretty easy. All right, here we are on the rear side of the throttle body. There's a little black plastic cover with one Phillips screw covering it. What I did, I just put an 11mm on here, ratchet, and then you can use that to open up the throttle like that. And once you kind of spin it with the socket, then you can unhook the throttle body cable. And then on the bottom side, kind of see, you need to unhook both of those, or loosen up both of those. I believe they're 8mm. And then we can continue to take the throttle body out. All right, here's the throttle body completely removed. Both injectors out, everything unplugged, throttle cable unhooked, and then let's see, right there, there's just a wire harness kind of plugged in there. You just have to, I don't know, squeeze it. I just used a pair of needle nose, squeezed on the back, and then pulled it out. So that's everything to get your throttle body out. You know, the 11mm socket on here. I used the 11mm to spin it like that to get it to full throttle position to unhook the cable. So really pretty easy to get the throttle body out. All right, so our next step here is to drill one hole. It's saying you can use either one on the inside here. Basically, we're going to install a vacuum port. So we're going to drill a pilot hole with the smaller bit supplied, and then the bigger bit, and then we're going to tap that into the hole for the vacuum port. So I'll get started on that. All right, so I drilled it with the number 30 drill bit and then the number 14 that are supplied, and all the way through. Of course, clean out all the metal shavings. I'm gonna clean everything before I put it back together anyways. And then we're going to tap that into, it says 0.625 of an inch should be outside the throttle body. So I'll go ahead and do that now. All right, so pay attention to this before you put it in. So you'll see the opening here is much larger than the opening there. Okay, so the small opening will come up. All right, we're going to tap that in until approximately 9/16 of an inch is remaining. We tap that in until there's about 9/16 remaining. And that's what it looks like on the inside. So get this all cleaned up and reassembled. Inside of this kit right there is where you're going to find a 32-inch rubber hose, and that's what we're going to hook up to the vacuum port and to put this little clamp on it. So we're going to do that before we reinstall it back onto the engine. All right, we have the 32-inch vacuum line hooked up, clamp is on, and let's put it back together. All right, we have the throttle body set back into place, the new vacuum line on, cleaned everything out. Especially important, make sure you really clean, make sure it's spotless. The injector seats there before you put those in, and when you're plugging everything back in, make sure that it clicks and you give it a decent tug to make sure it doesn't come undone at a later date. So the throttle body is pretty easy. All right, so we have all 4 wires plugged back in. We got 2 here, 1 right there, and then 1 down on the back side. We got the 2 new injectors put in. Those 4 bolts tightened down. We got the throttle hooked back up. I can slide that back into place. So we got this tightened down, and then 2, if you ever need to adjust your throttle, right there is where you can do it. We have this hose back into place. We have the down, you can't really see it too well from here, but all 4 of those, so 2 on each cylinder, those are both tightened back down, the 8 millimeters. So the throttle body should be back into position, everything hooked up, everything tightened down. Just have the cover right here on the end, and then we'll move on to the next step. All right, so what we're going to do next is remove this plastic piece with the 5 Phillips on top of it from the throttle body, and then we're going to put these 5 studs with Loctite, which is supplied in the kit, onto the top of the throttle body. So instead of having rubber hoses hooked up, we're going to have this hooked up to it. All right, inside of this kit right here on the top part, you're gonna find a 3/4 inch O-ring and this cover. And what I'm holding in my hand is the temperature sensor. That's what we pulled out of the back side of the airbox. So be that wire right there is what plugs into it. All right, so what we're going to do is put the O-ring in, and then put the temperature sensor in, and then put the cap over it to get an airtight seal, and then put some Loctite on the 2 screws holding it into place. All right, inside of this package, we're gonna find a seal, which the seal was inside of that, and special directions on there. So I have this laid out just like shown in there, and it's, so if you look closely, that's where they're joined together. And if I'm understanding this right, they want you to put that right there. So when you assemble this together, you're gonna put that joint right here when you put it together. All right, I have this into place. I gently pressed it in all the way around, so it's not quite flush, but almost with the surface. And then when you go to mate it up with the throttle body, it won't get pinched or lose its seal. So just make sure that's in properly all the way around. All right, so we have that tightened down. Five nuts on there. My kit did only come with 4 nuts, but I did have another nut laying around to make up for it. And keep in mind, for that far back corner, I just went in through where the driver's seat would normally be and just snugged all those up. It does say specifically not to get those too tight, but you can feel it. It'll just snug it up. It doesn't take much. And then in the kit, it comes with this extension for the temperature sensor. So right here's the original wire. Plug it into there. Plug it into the new location of your temperature sensor. All right, the next part is removing that motor mount, okay? So this is a motor mount on the side. To get that out, 2 bolts, front and back. 1 bolt going through here, and then on the bottom side, 1 bolt going through. And that's so you have room to add this bracket. And that's for the turbo. So I think with a little creativity, you might be able to get that on and tightened up without removing it, but I was just following the directions. All right, so we got the motor mount back in, got that bracket right there. Put back in. So while doing this, I did use a jack with a couple blocks of wood to support the engine, just to keep it in the same place. Otherwise it'll drop an inch or more and then you won't be able to get the bracket in. So support it from the bottom side if you're going to remove the bracket. All right, so next I took out the copper exhaust manifold gaskets. And here's the new ones. They come in the kit. So I pulled those out, lube these up a little bit and put them back in, and then start with the exhaust manifold. All right, so we use grease to hold those copper gaskets into the cylinder head, and then put the exhaust manifold on. So you'll slowly tighten all 4, rotating back and forth so it goes in evenly to 20 foot-pounds. And then make sure everything's tight. And then after you drive it a couple times, you go back there and retighten them. But the gap between the flange and the cylinder head should be equal if you're tightening them correctly. So you can just look at the gap, make sure they're good to go for that. And now we'll start with the turbo. All right, we're going to install this on the turbo. Gaskets and the 2 Allen heads, which go right there. All right, we installed some Teflon tape there to this end, not that one. And we're going to put it in there and tighten it up. All right, so we have the gasket on. I'm ready to hook it up to the exhaust manifold. It does come with 2 different bolts. So an M8 bolt goes in this hole and 2 M10s in this one to bolt it up to the exhaust manifold. And here's the nuts for them. All right, so we have the turbo just loosely sitting on there. The support bracket goes in one of the M10s and one of the M8s there on the back side, and that's what's going to come down and hook into here. So just got to make sure you get that in. All right, so we have the M10 bolts, these 2 tightened down to 40 foot-pounds. The M8 which is on the back side, tightened down to 30 foot-pounds. We have the supporting bracket installed and tightened down. I think these were 24 foot-pounds on the bottom and the top of the bracket. So that support bracket is tightened down, and everything should be good to go. All right, we're right at where the driver's seat would be. I took out the original crankshaft cap. Okay, I tightened that the gray portion, which is a 32 millimeter. And then once I had that snug, tightened down the specs, then I added the drain hose, and then I tightened down the drain hose. So the end that goes in there, there's an O-ring at this end of the hose and not the other. So lubed up the O-ring, threaded it in there. I believe the black nut here is a 27. Tighten that down. And then you run it below your radiator hose here, back and right into the bottom of the turbo. So this will be the engine oil drain from the turbo back into the engine. All right, next we're going to install this banjo fitting right near the starter, and I'll show you in a second. And this is going to be the oil supply line that lubricates the turbo. All right, so we're at the driver's seat. Right there's the starter. We're going to remove this 10 millimeter bolt right there, and that's where the oil supply for the turbo is going to go. So it's going to go just like that, and then that'll hook up there, and the other end will go up to the turbo. All right, we have the oil supply line for the turbo hooked up. You can see it comes with a clamp right there, and there's another clamp right there to route it around to the back. And then let's go. So right there's one, and then hooks right into the turbo right next to the oil drain. All right, now the turbo exit pipe. So here's the gasket. Okay, we'll be going on there. And the 2 bolts we'll use to hook it up to the turbo. The rubber bracket for there, and then the original gasket and bolts to hook it up to the muffler. Putting the gasket back on from the original header, and we have the new rubber piece on there as well. And I lubed those up with WD-40 so they slide right on and off. All right, so we're starting with air filter bracket. They have it, this actually goes on the bottom side of this, but they have triangles to show you what side is what, and a square, so you can't really assemble it wrong. All right, we got the air filter box bracket assembled. You can see square, square, triangle, triangle, and now we're going to put it on there. All right, so here's the bracket installed. It goes on the bolt holding your shock, and then there was already in the frame a hole there, and you just had to put the supplied nut and bolt in there for the bracket. So a little bit weird, but there it is. So here's the new air box. Comes with a K&N filter. So this is, I just put the 2 studs in there with Loctite on there, letting that dry up a little bit. But basically, that's going to go right there on the filter, tighten the filter down. And then inside of this canister, those 2 studs are going to pop out. Okay, then of course the sleeve's going to go over the K&N. So everything will go in there. And that goes on the top. There's 3 bolts holding that in. I'm not a huge fan of K&N filters because the only time I've had to adjust valves on Honda products is when people ran K&N filters. So just something to keep in mind. Hopefully that's not the case here. All right, so there's the bracket with the hose clamps around it. Here's the fresh air inlet. And the clean side. So it's going to kind of be a pain, even though you can clean this filter. You're going to have to take this cover off underneath here. You're going to have to take the filter assembly apart, take it out, and then clean it, re-oil it, put it back together. So Jackson, this is not compatible with the particle separator, but Jackson Racing is supposed to be releasing some products so you can use the particle separator with this airbox. All right, this is what I have so far. There's the new airbox, elbow, aluminum hose, another elbow going into the turbo. All right, this kit is having us make a new valve cover vent hose. Okay, so it's having us do some cuts. Here is the original valve cover vent hose. Okay, this hooks up to the valve. This hooked into the old factory airbox. They're having us cut it right past that 90-degree angle. So you're leaving the part that was hooked up to the valve cover. All right, here's the drain hose. Okay, so here's the end hanging down. So they're having us cut it right there. Put these two together, and then that's going to hook up here, route back around to this new aluminum. Let me see if I can get some light down there. There. And hook into here. So this is going to be the new valve cover vent. It's going to come up, around, and then hook into there. But for $5,800, why don't they just give you a new hose instead of splicing 2 existing hoses together? But I don't understand. All right, so that's what it looks like installed. The new valve vent hose connector back into the intake tube. All right, this is what it looks like before the intercooler. So you got that mounted on top of the turbo. You got that mounted on the intake manifold. This one's tightened down. This one's loose, so we can adjust a little bit for the intercooler. All right, so here's the power supply for the intercooler. That's going to plug into the fan on the intercooler. This positive negative is going direct to the battery. And this is going to end up in the fuse panel between the driver and passenger seat, about shoulder level. All right, so I briefly described the wiring harness, okay? I mean, they wrote like 3 pages here. It was hard to keep track of everything. But basically, one end is going to come over here, plug into the rear coil, and then, so here's the original rear coil wire. So it's just basically splicing into that. Not splicing in, but plugging into that. So that's what's going to let the fan motor know that it should go. So it goes over here. I showed you, battery. That was pretty simple. And then run this back up to hook into the fan. So I just told you that in 30 seconds on what they wrote about for 3 pages. So it was a little bit confusing. So here we are just above the engine. Here's this bracket. Okay, from the inside of the cab, you just have to back out 2 14mm bolts, and then they provide 2 longer 14mm bolts. They go all the way through. That are about 1 inch longer, And then you can bolt the bracket up to that. All right, so we have the intercooler sitting on both of those hoses. Took the O-rings, put a little grease on them, put them in there. This cap is going there. Got the other O-ring in here, and we'll put the recirculation valve on there. All right, so we're pretty much done. I added the hose here to the pipe. Here's the other end of it. Here's the vacuum line that we added to the throttle body. Put Loctite on all four of those, all four. So these as well. The bracket here, Loctite as well. So I guess all 6 bolts there on top. There, that's what's holding it. The fan is not plugged in. It says to wait until the ECU is reflashed before you plug in the fan. But yeah, it looks like flashing is the only thing left. All right, so underneath the driver's seat, that's what we're looking for. The cap will stay there, and then you should just be able to unplug it. Okay, here's the Jackson Racing programming. You just twist it into the back and plug it into there. All right, I went through a couple of the settings. Just had to touch the screen, select the Jackson Racing logo, the red right there on the left, touch that, and then touch flash, and then selected my tire size. Oh wait, then I selected my ECU type, which is the A. I don't have the AC. And then I selected 32-inch tires. And then you have to select yes to lock unit to ECU and flash. So it's only been a minute or so, and it's already at 28%. So also, I mean, you have to hook your battery back up on that. I didn't mention that earlier, so make sure your battery is hooked up, and make sure all of your accessories are turned off for this process. So. All right, let's give it a test. The flash only took a couple of minutes. That noise is the fan on the intercooler. Plug the fan back in after the flash. Quite a bit of air going through there. Doesn't look like any exhaust leaks. Bottom rear skid plate, battery cover, and used to be airbox cover, but now it's the intercooler cover. This is the piece that's going to cover the airbox where the snorkel used to be. So the heat shield, no longer used. Old header, no longer used. Airbox, no longer used. But then we'll have to put the plastic piece behind the driver passenger seat, center console, seats, and we'll be ready to go.